Hello and welcome to Season 11 of the podcast formerly known as The Hive. Now in its 5th year, I decided to rename the show Natalie Nahai in Conversation, and you'll notice from the cover art that the design has also changed. If you missed the teaser, I'd love to bring you up to speed and share a few behind-the-scenes insights with you here. Having woven together a whole variety of topics and guests over the past 5 years, I wanted to centre upon a visual identity that connects into our ongoing exploration of what it means to be human in search of connection and meaning within the wider web of life. The hand on the cover is actually a part of a larger oil painting I created called Light in the Well of Shadows, and the tiny bee you'll see is a painting I created specifically for this project as a little nod to the Hive. If you'd like to see these paintings in full, you can head over to my Instagram account @NatalieNahai. As we dive into this new season, we'll be deepening our inquiry into our relationship with one another, with technology and the living world, and how we might reimagine humanity in the face of accelerating technological advancement, ecological disruption and systemic change. I'll be speaking with people at the leading edge of everything from syntropic and regenerative agriculture, viticulture and biodiversity, and artificial intelligence, to folks working at the intersection of technology and law, organisational resilience, personal transformation, leadership, and much more. As we go along, I'll be adding relevant books and resources to a dedicated page on my website, which you can check out at natalienahai.com/resources. And alongside this audio version of the podcast, you can also watch the video version over on my YouTube channel, where I'll be posting additional bonus content with my guests. I'll include all the links in my show notes. I hope you find this season uplifting and useful, and if you have any questions or suggestions for future guests or themes, you can reach out to me on Instagram and LinkedIn @NatalieNahai. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the journey. I'm kicking off the season in perhaps an unexpected place, starting in conversation with someone whose resilience, determination and skill enabled her to overcome extraordinary odds to lead a flourishing life in which she now dedicates her time to empowering others. Meet Amy Hopper, an executive coach, digital marketer and founder of TOA, who is also fondly known as the Digital Wolverine, a particularly curious name which we'll be hearing about later. Having graduated at the top of her class in her Sociology BA, specialising in mental health, alienation in the workplace, and the sociology of work, Amy founded her first business at 25, the digital marketing agency AM Marketing. At 26, she was hit by a dangerous driver and suffered permanent spine damage, PTSD, anxiety, and chronic pain for the next 5 years. By age 28, her company was named one of the Google Top 30 UK agencies, and at 29, she received the Amazon Triumph Over Adversity Award. At 30, she won the UK Digital Role Model of the Year, and at 31, she underwent a spinal fusion surgery and was wheelchair-bound, shortly after which she became widowed during lockdown. At 33, she decided to sell her business, and after a grueling, touching journey back to health, she was able to travel the world solo at 33, hiking over 600 kilometres in over 8 countries and 26 cities. Upon her return, she founded her agency, TOA, and she is now working with some of the world's largest companies to remove well-being barriers, producing high-performing teams. I first met Amy through our mutual friend, Richard Savage, who told me that I simply had to meet this extraordinary woman, and he wasn't wrong. You'll tell from our laughter and energy that we were excited to be in conversation together, and while the video didn't work out due to technical issues at my end, I hope you'll enjoy this moving conversation in which we explore tenderness, loss, resilience, and how the simple steps can be the ones that help us to transform adversity into growth. Amy, welcome. I'm very excited that you're the one with whom I am kicking off this new take. Before we move into the theme of this season, I want to ask you, what do you think is going on in the global human psyche, if we can use that frame?
Oh my gosh. What a question. Well, from my perspective, in terms of what I'm working on now and who I work with, what's going on in the global psyche right now is a lot of unrest, a lot of foundations have been shaken, a huge amount of anxiety, and a lot of people that are lost. I'd say lost is the word. Not and perhaps not knowing their place anymore, given what we've all been through in the last few years.
And do you think a lot of that is to do with not digesting, perhaps, I'm probably projecting here, but not digesting perhaps on a more kind of cultural level the amount of shit that we've been through, and there's sort of this suddenly the WHO have kind of let it drift away, as opposed to a markation saying the pandemic's over and let's talk about what happened. Like, there doesn't seem to be much closure. Or do you think that's to do, like, that's maybe one part of it and it's to do with other factors?
I think that's a huge part of it. There hasn't been this closure. There's sort of been I think during the pandemic, we were, I want to say guided, but almost pushed through every step. And you said, well, you're doing this now, you're doing this now, you're doing this now. And then all of a sudden, we're out of lockdown and that's it. Get on with it.
Yeah.
And it really didn't, it didn't give any sort of acknowledgement in my mind to what an entire world went through.
Yeah.
And the mental health issues, the implications that come along with that, whether it was anxiety going back into work, whether it was people's livelihoods that were destroyed, people that lost their lives, and just something. Oh yes, it's done now. Well, back to the office you go.
Yeah.
It seems to be the way that a lot of my clients are feeling, and that shakes a person. It really does.
And I think also that thing of back to the office you go, it's really the sense of business being the priority after everything that we went through, and the glimpses of a different way of maybe relating and prioritizing. And that suddenly now it's almost like, and I don't know how it's been for you, but I've definitely noticed this year in particular, this extreme acceleration. I don't know how much of it is to do with also kind of all the news around AI, automation, and that a lot of things that have been cooking for a long time have suddenly come out of the oven. It's like, right, iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3, keep up, this kind of, this sense of not just urgency, but precarity that, gone now is COVID. There's something new to freak out about. How are you finding people coping in your coaching practice? Are people coping?
It depends on the industry. The majority of people, I'd say, actually aren't. And the most important thing I try and do in the coaching and also in the workshops is actually sit down and everyone admit that to each other, because that's kind of the key thing, is that if we keep in our separate lives, then we don't have this sort of shared empathy. I'd say, yeah, AI, a huge thing. People there's this sort of sense. I said this at a speaking event a few years ago, that this sense that you're going to go to sleep an expert and wake up a novice.
Yeah.
And the idea that you have to keep going and going and going, this sort of keep up or give up.
Yeah.
It's not conducive for productive, happy people at work. And I'd also say that coming back into the workplace, as you quite rightly said, there is this sense of, well, we're back into the office now. And it used to be, oh no, well, we've proven that an entire world and many, many industries can work from home effectively. We did it for over a year. But now, oh no, it's got to be hybrid working. And oh no, you have to come into the office now. Just a couple of years later. So I'm finding in my work that actually a lot of companies are wanting to teach things like empathy within work and teach collective well-being, because we've almost had so much time apart from each other, just thinking in our lane, in our office, in our home, and not seeing anyone. This idea that there's someone, a human behind an email, has almost become a bit foreign.
Yeah, there's that kind of detachment almost that's crept in.
Yeah. Exactly, and we know so just hundreds and hundreds of studies that empathy is a business skill, and not only is it a business skill, but it's hugely necessary, no matter what your organisation, the size of your team, for managers and C-suite directors that are managing people. Empathy is probably, I'd say, the key skill if you're going to have a successful team and a successful business full of productive, happy people.
Okay, so much more I want to ask you, but one question that comes to my mind, and maybe I'll weave in this question to all of the subsequent episodes because I quite like it. I've done it like the Flourishing Future Salon, and it always kind of yields some interesting answers, which is, what does success mean to you? As someone who works at the intersection of well-being, empathy, C-suite, executive coach, like that whole world alongside all the other stuff that you do.
Well, I suppose a good question is, what did success used to look like?
Yeah. Okay, let's start there.
And I grew up in as many people do, I had very, very good education, a school that pushed university, that pushed sporting achievement, academic achievement, then getting a good job, then getting the good salary, a higher level, higher salary. That was what success was. And it's only through my experiences and going through just a huge amount of trauma in the last few years and being in a situation where I genuinely thought I was going to lose my life that actually it completely reframed how I viewed success and what it actually was. And for me, success is now waking up every day happy and glad for the day, grateful for the day, and going to bed thinking, what a great day that was, or just being able to have this sense of well-being and contentment. And it's only since when I was constantly chasing. This is what I see with the people I coach all the time. Just this chase. There's always a chase, and when you get that thing, when they get that thing, then they're chasing something else, and they don't even stop to smell the roses. It's just next thing, more money, more promotion, blah blah blah, and everything is based on external validation, whether that be in relationships, whether that be at work. It's all external validation and material things, which might produce some form of happiness or contentment for a while, but it doesn't last. So it's really the inner work that produces that contentment. And I have to say, I've been in positions where I've lost absolutely everything, as you know, a few years ago, and actually felt contentment and felt more contentment than I did when my business was flying and making six figures.
Wow. It's curious. It reminds me of, I'm not one for remembering quotes or anything like that, but there was this beautiful talk by Alan Watts I listened to years ago, which really struck me, which is about the idea that life isn't just about the climax, about the kind of the last bar. If you think about it as a score of music or a beautiful piece, you don't go to a concert to just listen to the final chord. You go to listen to the whole thing, and you dance to it if you're lucky, if you're somewhere where you can move. And he talks about life in that way, that it wasn't about the final thing. It was about enjoying it as an opus, as a work that you enjoy, that you engage in. And there's something so beautiful about that. And the fact that it's kind of that constant striving and restlessness and lack that means that even if we've got what we think we need, beyond obviously basic needs and security and the rest of it, and living a life of dignity, it might not fill that void because the void can't be filled with outside stuff. But so I wonder if you might be comfortable talking a little bit about, what it does mean for you to have lost perhaps almost everything, and how that's shifted your perspective and sense of life and what matters to you, and how it's informed who you are now, and within the frame of kind of resilience and adaptation, which is the key theme, some of the key themes for this season.
Exactly. So, I went into the job market quite young. I think when most of my friends were still either traveling or
pissing about behind bike sheds.
Partying, yeah, exactly. I was 25 and I started a marketing agency.
That's still astounding to me.
Yeah, but when I was 26, I was involved in a high-speed car collision, a woman went into my lane and she hit me head on. I went through a brick wall. I resulted in permanent spine damage. At the time, I couldn't feel my legs, and I genuinely thought that was it. And I
That's
can remember,
terrifying.
yeah, it was. I can remember pulling myself from the wreckage, and it was in the middle of December, lying on the cold hard ground, like right next to the car engine, and just thinking, I'm done.
Wow.
I'm done. And there, I could hear helicopters, sirens all around me. There was a doctor in one of the queues with a few cars behind. She was checking me for internal bleeding, and I have to, in that moment when you genuinely think that that's it for you, you don't think, oh, I'm really glad I got that 10k bonus, or I'm really glad that I worked late last week and got that report done. You think about your friends and you think about your family. You think about the time you spent with them, and you think about how you want more. And that's it.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself at that moment, like that is actually, I'm very grateful for that moment, because I think it's something a really great coach said to me, like, you've sort of come to the point in your life where almost people get to in their 60s when they might have overcome cancer, or they might have overcome a heart attack or a stroke, and they sort of start thinking, okay, well, I'm going to start living my life now, but I've had this at 26. So it's almost a bit of a gift, really. Well, I like to see it now, looking back in hindsight, I see it as a bit of a gift. But it resulted in 5 years of chronic pain. I had to have several spinal surgeries, and just and my back would go into spasm every sort of 8 weeks, and I wouldn't be able to move for a few days. I couldn't sit down for more than half an hour. And I'm 1 year into my business at this point, but still got to the point where it was we were named one of the top 30 Google agencies in the UK out of 33,000 agencies.
It's just nuts.
We won global accounts for some of the biggest digital accounts in the world. We were just this lovely little team of 5 at one point, and just with offices in Canterbury, but went from second bedroom to third floor offices in a city centre within I think it was less than a year. It was crazy. But it's because we just put so much effort on relationships, and I learned the power of saying no, because I was in pain. Because I was in pain. If I said yes to things, I would be in pain. So I only picked the things I really, really wanted to do and knew that would put the business in the right direction. And that's what we did. But yeah, it ended up resulting in the December 2019, I had to have a spinal fusion. So I'm part titanium now. Someone on LinkedIn called me the Digital Wolverine, and now it's just stuck.
I love it.
Which is amazing. But then, of course, we went into COVID. Went into lockdown. All my physiotherapy was cancelled. I had to do my own physiotherapy from YouTube videos online, and I was in a wheelchair. While my parents cared for me, and I couldn't bend, I couldn't twist. I blacked out with pain regularly. It was just, yeah, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And then very, very sadly, while we're in lockdown, and a couple of months after my spinal fusion, my business partner and husband took his own life. So he's definitely one of the well, COVID obviously had a lot to contribute to that, but being in this position of I've lost my body and my partner, and threatened to lose my house. I'm living with my parents. I can barely walk, and just in this very, very humbling position of utter surrender. And it just shows you that it doesn't matter what work and how many hours you work, how many 60, 70-hour weeks I did, how many bank holidays I worked. You can still be in a position where you lose it all. But I started thinking, you know what, I'm going to think about what I can do, not what I can't do. So, and I was at that point, I've been the subject of honestly the most wonderful, beautiful experiences of human kindness. I mean, there's so many things in the world that make that they say on the news and make you think, oh, humans are awful, but actually, you know what, humans are
Yeah.
bloody wonderful. And I've had acquaintances that have turned into friends. And the way I was, perhaps it was because we were in lockdown and everyone just had nothing else to do but be nice and message me every day. But just constant messages every day, and acquaintances that are now dear friends, and people that the way that they just held me, even though we couldn't touch. Like I have to say, even though we couldn't touch each other, grieving is a horrible thing. To be one side of the room and your friends the other side of the room, and you're both crying, and you can't hold each other. Is I can't describe it. But to have the walks with each other, and I went out on a walk with a different person every day. Someone turned up and walked with me every single day, and it really started helping that processing, and also helped then start rebuild my body. And it got to a point where people started saying, you know, how are you doing this? How are you still here? How are you still kind? How are you still smiling? And there's I suppose the British, oh, you know, you just put one foot in front of the other, you just get on with it and carry on. And I realised that wasn't actually true. That I had developed in my own mind a very specific system for coping and for dealing and to achieve my goals throughout all of these challenges and everything that I was going through. I was going through trauma therapy. I was having like 4 or 5 hours of therapy a day some days in the early days. I was on diazepam and then citalopram. It was very, very, very difficult time. Some days just getting up and having a shower was a triumph, which you have to be kind and think, you know what, that was a triumph. But I realised I had developed this system, and I read every single self-help guide in the library. I had previously been to the yoga ashrams. I had taken the supplements. I'd had chronic pain for 6 years and studied. And my actual background is in sociology and alienation within the workplace. And I was able to draw on my degree and use the psychology training and you know, I've actually got a program that I've developed for myself that is pushing me forward, and I'm achieving these goals, albeit slowly, through the most horrific trauma. I've turned my wounds into wisdom, and that's why I then founded TOA, because I want people that are going, whether they are going through a broken spine or a broken toe, or it could be that they just want a promotion or they just want help and support while they're managing their business. TOA is a system that I want to give people that wisdom without having the wounds that I've had beforehand.
Well, thank you for being so candid. I can't imagine it's, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, and I don't imagine it's an easy thing to talk about, or an easy thing to let land either, because I think I definitely notice this in myself. When I feel like I have more capacity to feel, I can feel more from other people, and it can be quite challenging not to shut down. And one of the things you mentioned at the beginning of describing what you've experienced was surrender. And then also with surrender comes a giving up of control. And then whether you collapse or you somehow find, I'm curious how you would describe this, but for me it's like that. There's this a song that I write called The Brightest Star, and it's the one line in it is, and in the darkest moment, that's when the brightest star begins to shine. And it's a sense of when everything else goes black, there's a point of light somewhere that you have to orient towards. Yeah. And sometimes it means someone else lifting your gaze to that star until you keep fixated and find your way through. And I'm curious how you found that point of connection back to life when it was so painful.
The people was the biggest the biggest thing, having that support around me. I think it did help that we were in lockdown, because it's like the whole world had stopped with me. It's like I think a lot of people describing grief, particularly when losing partners or losing someone to suicide, which is like grief turned up to 10, they describe it as. It's almost this sense of you're still while everything else is moving, whereas there was very much a sense of everything is still with me. So there was I didn't feel this need to catch up quicker than was right for me, because there was no catching up to do. Having a goal was incredibly important to me. For me, it was about being able to hike again, because I loved hiking so much, and it brought me so much joy. And when I had like horrific PTSD, I went and visited the Lake District for a week, and it actually cured some of the physical symptoms I was having, just being around nature and sitting in woodland. And so that was my goal for me, and it was every day. Okay, well, I can't walk, I can't hike. Can I walk to the end of my parents' drive and back? And tomorrow, can I walk? Oh, I can walk to the end of that street lamp and back. And those tiny little increments every single day, and being kind to myself. And after a year, looking back and thinking, oh, I've run a marathon, but just with one step a day. And having that patience and kindness was really key, and having a goal, but splitting that goal down to make it smaller. And it's when you've said about the surrender, that couldn't be truer. And I find that actually it's our obsession with an outcome, or a certain type of outcome, that actually causes a lot of us so much pain, and a lot of our anguish, and a lot of our mental anguish. Is this is something that's going to happen, and this is how I want it to turn out, and being actually thinking now, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I would like to happen. This is what I'm moving towards. This is my goal, my affirmation for myself, but not being attached to an outcome, to a specific outcome.
Easier said than done, huh?
I mean, people may be saying to me, "Whatever, Amy, that's a load of BS." I'm obviously not some sort of guru here that isn't attached to anything that's ridiculous. But certainly it helps me to remind myself in those moments. And also reminds me that, Amy, you've been in a position where you have lost everything and built yourself back up again. So what failure, what thing could the universe possibly give you right now, touch wood, that you wouldn't be able to come back from? And that's quite a powerful place to be. It's quite it does make you realize that actually, if you take each step as a learning opportunity, and an opportunity for growth, rather than seeing everything as a failure, reframing it like that does have a massive impact on the way you look at challenges.
I think it's interesting that one of the things that I notice, and especially in the last month I've had direct experience of, is that, as you mentioned, when you get hit physically or emotionally by loss or grief, something that just knocks you so far that you're forced in some ways to reevaluate how you're living. In my mind, it's a lot. How do I want to say it? It's like, it's almost, but not always, inescapable that you'll think about the deepest questions, like you mentioned, when you're on that sort of knife edge of life and death. You're not thinking about the hours that you pulled last week. You're thinking about your loved ones and the things that you love. And it's almost unavoidable, I would guess, from what I've read from people, from what you shared. And I think there's something, as much as we hope that we never have to reach that critical point, or that it happens out of the blue, there's the other side of it, which is, I think I suspect many of us don't realise on a day-to-day basis how much we are living with a low-level, ambient sense of pushing, self-denigration, critical voice, where, because we've lived with it for so long and the thought patterns are just there, we don't necessarily even notice them unless something makes us aware. And I think there's an interesting question around, people talk a lot about trauma these days, which is amazing because I think it's really useful. But also, what does it mean for us to be living with this kind of muted but almost constantly present criticism, goal orientation, kind of productivity script of you are only worthy if, you will be happy when, all of these sorts of things. How can we move to a position where we perhaps can turn up the clarity and volume on these voices, on these shadow voices, I think of them as shadows, to be able to meet them and say, oh, fuck me, this is actually what's going on inside my heart and mind, my system, to then be able to choose to relate with them differently so that it doesn't take, hopefully, a knocked sideways experience to be able to kind of show up to life in a fuller, more heartfelt way.
Absolutely. You put that beautifully, by the way.
Thank you. I've been thinking about it a lot.
I had a wonderful, wonderful EMDR therapist. I don't know if you've heard of EMDR. EMDR is an amazing therapy, fantastic for PTSD. I've had several sessions of it. I couldn't recommend it enough.
Can you explain what EMDR stands for and what it means? Because not everyone will be... Oh, right.
I always forget. It's like a mental block. I forget what it stands for.
I can jump in. I think it's something like eye movement desensitization reprogramming.
Essentially, you are performing bilateral stimulation. So for me, tapping works. Some people, it's a sound from one side to the other. But you're almost you're simulating a REM cycle as you recall the trauma again and again and again and again.
Which sounds awful, but it's actually not as bad in the moment necessarily.
I mean, I'd say the first 7 weeks, you have to do a 12-week course. It's like antibiotics. You have to complete it because you're opening that door and you need to make sure that you deal with it, and then the door is shut kindly again. Not shut, but you have to process what comes out and not leave it. So essentially, when you're processing, you're almost not tricking, but you are saying to your brain, "I'm taking this trauma and I'm processing this as memory now." Whereas trauma is at the front of the mind, it's very visceral, it appears and creates physical symptoms within the here and now, and it takes us back to that moment as though we're there. Whereas with memory, we look at
so you're like reliving it
again and again. Whereas with memory, you might think, well, that's a terrible, terrible memory, but it's a memory and we almost separated it from it because it's in the past. So that's what EMDR does, and it's absolutely fantastic. So I had an EMDR therapist who said to me, Amy, you don't have to be traumatized in order to have trauma. So we sort of have this idea that the word trauma, which in itself is quite a visceral word, that you almost have to be this sort of crumbling wreck that is traumatized, and but actually all of us have trauma. All of us have trauma from our different relationships, experiences, our childhoods, which we then carry with us and influence how we speak to people, our reactions, how we get triggered in everyday life, whether that be at work or at home. So when we're thinking about, for me, when I was thinking about dealing with that and processing those emotions, when things like grief come up or it comes up, if I have an inner critical voice that comes up, rather than thinking, I'm not going to think about that or letting it flow, I actually sit down and tackle it, almost like sit down with myself and say, okay, well, what is this voice and where has it come from? Why do we think this about ourselves? And normally I'll, like the exercises that we've done together, like sit down and actually write down that thought and think, okay, well, what's the evidence for this? What's the evidence against this? Would I say this to my friend? Normally, no. There's normally a reason behind it. So say, for example, women, a classic one is something about our physical bodies, something that we're not happy about in our physical bodies. And if I ever catch those sort of thoughts myself, I say, hang on a minute, like, why are you thinking that about yourself? Sit down and realize that actually it's probably come from someone that said something many, many, many years ago, something in my past, or a partner or family member that said something at some point, or something that has been pushed upon me by the media and absorption of things I see online. and realize it's not actually my thought at all. And it takes a lot of kindness, a lot of self-awareness, a lot of being able to step back from your own thinking and think about your own thinking, something we call DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And it takes a lot of work to sit and do that. But after a while, you start to form a habit. And after a while of waking up every morning and practicing gratitude and looking myself in the mirror and bigging myself up, your brain gets on board. And then it takes,
So it's that practice.
It takes about 3 months, 90 days to form a habit. So after that, you should really, like, just sitting down in front of the mirror and saying positive affirmations to yourself. After that time, you do start to believe it, and then it does change. Something changes in you.
It's funny, as you mentioned that, I can feel myself on various levels having different responses. One of them is like wincing, just going, oh my God, can I imagine doing that? Another one is what a twat I would feel like. And another also is like the sense of expansion and what happens if I do it. You know, we know from the literature that when you want to think differently, you have often it's the sense that you have to create the behavior first for the mind to follow. And often we put the cart before the horse and we think we have to think differently for the behavior to follow. And weirdly, it's kind of like, it's almost like playing the role until you fully inhabit it or it fully inhabits you somehow. That it's not a faking it until you're making it. It's literally like practicing driving the car so that you become the driver. And there isn't a faking to it. It's literally just getting comfortable in that space.
The thing I say to my clients is that actually the thought of you saying, oh, I don't know, I don't. One thought sometimes I've had, oh, I don't like my belly. That was the thought that I had. Yeah. Classic thought that we've all had. I was born with that thought. I probably didn't have that thought until I was a teenager, and someone put it in, or something put it in, and then I learnt that thought. So I can quite easily unlearn it.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because there's also the thing as an adult, you can reparent yourself, but also you're kind of aware of all the inputs kind of careening towards you. And again, it's this ambient thing where often we're not aware of all of the different inputs, and thank goodness, because it would be overwhelming. But there is that sense of having to, and maybe this is where the habit forming comes in. It's like creating almost a filter intentionally so that you can more easily train yourself at an implicit level what to pay attention to or what not to, because otherwise it's so difficult. And I think part of that, maybe this is a good time to talk about perfectionism. So part of that, I think, also is relinquishing the need to control or attempt, because how much can you actually control? I mean, we control to a degree, I think. The need to control or direct or influence how other people perceive us. And I'm not saying like show up to work and let it all hang out, because we know that also is not necessarily the best path forward if you want to lead a flourishing life. But there is something around finding that kind of balance point where, you know, I'm doing this right now, and I was thinking about this with the Patreon stuff. We'll see if this comes to fruition or not. Or doing videos on LinkedIn, which I hate doing because I feel like I have to do hair and makeup, and I've got a professional, you know, image to uphold and all the rest of it, or to wield my words and intellect in a certain way so that I'm less prone to being cut down, like all of this stuff that we tell ourselves, for which generally at some point there's been evidence for or suggestions of this might happen if you do X, Y, Z. And there's kind of that leap that you have to make, which I'm trying to do now, in no small part thanks to you, where you kind of just go,
yeah,
fuck it.
I was about to say that. I just about to say that, but didn't like, can I swear on this?
No, you can totally. We've got the explicit marking on it just so that we can speak more freely. I like my salty language. But there is that kind of, and that was one of the best mantras when I was writing the first book. It was like, who am I to write this book? And I thought, fuck it, why not? And coming back to that mantra, and some people would balk at the idea of it being a mantra, can really just free you up a little bit.
Absolutely. I think we've coming back to your first point, we've and what I'm seeing with a lot of my clients is we've lost this connection with our intuition. And this, because and a lot of us are on our phones a lot, and we're constantly sort of detaching ourselves from our own feelings and our own emotions. that doesn't make them less there. If anything, it actually makes them worse and makes them louder. So having that connection with our intuition and also our bodies, so like that, and being, if we're around someone that is giving us those thoughts or making us feel that way, being able to feel that in your body, whether it's in your stomach or your chest, or sometimes it can be in your head. I don't like how this person makes my body feel. It's normally a really good indication that actually the words that they're saying and the energy that they're providing is not conducive with your growth and what you want to achieve. And you say that, I've just got a good feeling about this person. That's your intuition. And I think people should be more receptive to following that.
It's interesting, like the intuition piece. I was talking about this with Freddie, my partner, yesterday, and he showed me a clip of Caroline Myss, who's I think she's an American writer. Some people, my mum really likes her. I'm not particularly familiar with her work, but there was this really compelling, I found it compelling, description she gave of intuition, because you often think of intuition as one aspect of, when you have like that good connection, that good rapport.
Yeah.
And that's one example of when intuition really flows and there's that connection, and then it can flourish into something beautiful. And she also said something else which was really interesting, because I've not heard it described in this way, and I'm going to paraphrase here. It was something around intuition also being that kind of persistent thrum in the belly of something needing your attention, and there's courage required to listen to it. It's like, that's really interesting. So for instance, feeling like you want to make a change in your life. You're talking about helping clients make changes that maybe are going against the script of what we should be doing, what success should look like in inverted commas. And yet there's something that will not let them go. There's a desire to pursue something, to take a risk, to grow, to go beyond one's threshold of what one knows, perhaps. And she made that point. It was like, this is something that at some level you feel you can't ignore. And it's not just about the good feelings which are included in the mix. It's also about that discomfort of, this idea won't let me go. There's something to be explored here. I wonder what you feel about that.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, that's the things that as well is that when you just saying then about positive and negative emotions, I don't believe there are positive and negative emotions. There are just emotions. And we've attributed judgment onto different emotions based on their perception in society, like anger. Anger is judged as a really negative emotion, particularly I think for women. We're afraid of being labelled as hysterical or a bitch or whatever, or anger is seen as aggressive, too over masculine, but actually anger is a really, really positive emotion. It allows us it shows us when our boundaries have been crossed. It shows us when someone has stepped on our core values, or where it's time to set a boundary and move forward on more positive terms. And jealousy is even a positive emotion to observe, because it shows us desire and shows us where, okay, well, maybe that if I'm feeling jealous about that, this is something that I want, that this is a possible direction that I should be thinking about traveling in. So reframing emotions as that is really, really important. I really, really like the piece about this. It's a nagging feeling that won't let go. When I'm dealing with my clients that are looking to grow or looking to go into another industry or want to start a different business, or they've got a different, I normally attribute this feeling of they're scared about it, but they're also excited.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of like, and that to me is a great sign that you're about to step into new growth and you're about to expand your comfort zone. If it's something that you're very, very fearful of, and the only emotion there is sort of fear, anger, perhaps resentment, jealousy, then you think, okay, well, that could be something else. But when there's excitement and opportunity and but also a little bit of fear, that for me is a great indicator of, okay, well, let's step in and see where this goes.
So let's talk about that before I go to the closing questions. The closing question I have for this conversation is around how we can how we can recognize when that sense of trepidation and excitement is happening, because it shows up in different ways. And I think often we can fear that change is going to be harmful because we don't know it yet. This is kind of sense of maybe we have financial obligations, professional, psychological, like, I've built my life into this one role and psychologically I don't feel willing yet to let it go, whatever it might be. And this is something that I think maybe if we're lucky and we have the chance to change in our lives, we can touch on at various different points. So it's more of a kind of process thing than a one size fits all. Here's your solution. You only have to do it once and on you go. But so for folks listening to this thinking, oh, actually, this sounds like I might be in that zone, if you like. What would you offer as advice for inquiring into that?
Okay. I think, first of all, you're completely right. I'm not suggesting that we all just we all just go with the flow and follow our emotions, regardless of our responsibilities.
No.
Because obviously we have to be practical as well, and not just live in that state. I think what you're just describing as well is being able to tell the difference between one's intuition and anxiety. Because sometimes, particularly if you're just stepping onto the sort of the self-awareness train for the first time, intuition and anxiety can actually, it's very hard to see how they're different voices.
Yeah,
and even now
totally.
I have to really sometimes think about, okay, is this an intuition voice, or is this an anxious voice of a mind that's trying to protect me based on a past event that is projecting into the future and isn't related to this event. For me, personally, and for a lot of my clients, I found that this sort of the anxiety voice, it normally is attributed to negative words, negative connotations, and it's normally very loud. It's at the forefront of your mind. It says things that don't seem to be like they're helping you grow. And there's normally a time attached to it as well. Like, I should be doing this, or why can't I do this now? And you need to do this now, or if you don't do this, then this. And then that's what my anxious voice sounds like. My intuition is generally much more calmer.
Interesting.
It says things that is sort of in the background, just as a nice sort of supportive voice. This would be wonderful. This makes us excited, and it is normally attributed with words of affirmations or things that are going to help grow. It's normally much more moderated and unbiased.
And it sounds like the quality of it is less fraught or
It's
urgent,
less fraught,
perhaps?
less urgent, much more of a gentle guiding hand rather than a shove in the back. What I would say is that what helps is getting it down on paper, because we can mull these things over and over again in our heads. And for me, when I'm in this position, I like journaling or making a board with pictures and drawing and actually writing down, okay, what is this thought? Does this make me happy? Can I do this? And actually looking at the practicalities of it and getting all of my thoughts down on paper so I can just look at them in front of me. That makes the practice a lot easier and helps me sort out through whether it's the right thing to do. Normally, though, I'm a very gut intuition orientated person, and if it feels right and I recognize the feeling, I go, yeah, let's go for it.
But I think also that it's useful to say that I think that calibration to your gut and discerning which sensation quality is associated or qualities are associated with which voice is a really interesting practice.
For me, if it's a bad gut feeling, it's normally in my stomach. And if it's maybe an anxious or excitement, I feel it in my chest. I've noticed so different people may feel those feelings different in their body, and it's up to notice your intuition and where you're feeling certain things. Also, this isn't an individual practice. If it's a case of, oh, should I go for this thing? Having good people around you is so important. And those good people that you know are there to support your growth and want to see you do well, without jealousy, without any sort of envy or negativity, and asking those people and getting a really good sounding board and having different people from different walks of life around you is so important for those decisions that perhaps sometimes you can't make them by yourself without
Yeah.
seeking further clarification, or sometimes just someone telling you yes you can is half the issue.
Makes all the difference.
Yeah.
So, closing questions for you then. Where have I even put them? Yes, here we go. So I have two. One is a practical one at the end. And the preeminent, what it is actually, the penultimate question, which we touched on actually throughout this conversation, is how do you orient yourself towards life and beauty on dark days?
That's such a good question. Through kindness to myself, most importantly, but also realizing that dark days are never actually dark days. They might be a dark hour. They might be a dark 10 minutes. They might be a dark, morning, but they won't stay like that. Tackling that emotion, talking to myself and thinking, okay, where is this coming from? But then finding joy in the small things. And that could be something as simple as I'm going to go for a walk and feel the breeze on my skin. It could be that I'm going to enjoy this first cup of coffee in the morning. But finding joy in the small things is probably what has got me through so much. Just simple thing.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, Amy, if people want to learn more about your work, where are the different and best places to find you?
Well, we can go to toagroup.co.uk, which is the newly launched website for TOA Group Consultancy. We remove wellbeing barriers to produce high-performing teams. There's the plaque.
Brilliant.
Or connect with me on LinkedIn. That'd be the best place. I check it regularly and answer all of the messages that I get through on my DMs. So yeah, please do.
Brilliant. And I'll put links to both the TOA and your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And thank you so much for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure, real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Natalie Nahai in Conversation. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please do pop over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever it is that you listen and give a rating and a review. It really does mean the world to me to read your support, and it keeps me going to create more seasons, especially as this is a self-funded project into which we pour hours of work creating, recording, and producing each episode. To find out more about my work and how to get involved in my projects, you can sign up to my newsletter at natalienahai.com, explore additional books and resources at natalienahai.com/resources, and you can follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Natalie Nahai. My thanks to Caro C for producing, thank you for listening, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the next episode.